Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're excited to present Designing and Maintaining a Native Garden for Four-Season Interest. A well-designed native garden provides beauty year-round while supporting pollinators and wildlife. We'll explore the best native plants for each season, design tips, and maintenance strategies to keep your landscape thriving. We're thrilled to have a special presenter this evening, Chris Baran, the founder of Resilient Design. To introduce Chris, I'll turn it over to Kathy. Take it away, Kathy.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. And yes, we are thrilled to have Chris Baran with us. I do want to ask you before I introduce our special guest, please remember to like this video. It really helps our channel. And if you would also be so kind as to subscribe so that you're always aware when we bring out new content. Now, Chris Baran is the founder of Resilient Design, a garden and landscape design, installation, and stewardship firm in Chicago that focuses on using native plants to create landscapes that are both ecologically sound and aesthetically pleasing. Chris is dedicated to transforming outdoor spaces into thriving ecosystems. Yay, yay, Chris. Chris has a background in horticulture with expertise in sustainable landscapes, practices, landscape and garden design, perennial plant communities, and garden stewardship. The Resilient Design team has over 20 years experience in landscaping, horticulture, and conservation. Resilient Design proudly serves the greater Chicagoland area, working with clients across DuPage, Will, and Cook counties. But even if you don't live in this area, Chris is bringing us a ton of information tonight so that anybody across the country can learn a lot about native gardening from Chris. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks, guys. I'm really excited to be here and talk to everybody about my favorite thing, plants and gardening.
We're all addicted.
Yep, it's a good addiction. Are we ready to get started?
Yes, I am
Okay.
trying to fast forward my slide and it doesn't want to go. There we
There we
go.
go. Okay, so I just wanted to give everyone a quick rundown of what we're going to cover tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about our practice and our plant-based approach to gardening and landscape, and how that leads into ecological horticulture, our design philosophy, and then how we allow the plants to guide us through the seasons as we garden. Oh, we can just go right to, I think you already did all the background. That's fine.
Tell us again, Chris.
Yeah. Oh, I can talk a little. Yeah. So as Kathy said, we're an ecological horticulture practice in Chicago. We do design, installation, stewardship, and consulting. And we have clients all over the Chicagoland area, including DuPage and Will counties. Yeah, I'm Chris. I have a background in sustainable landscapes. In addition to my education and experience with garden and garden design, I'm a volunteer with the Illinois Landscape Contractor Association's Sustainable and Ecological Landscaping Committee. That's a big mouthful. We put on the Impact Conference every October that's focused on sustainable landscaping practices. And I also will be this summer teaching at College of DuPage with Roy Diblick. I studied with Roy from Northwind Perennial Farm at College of DuPage. And he's asked me to come back this summer and help him teach classes in perennial plant communities and perennial garden stewardship. So I'm really excited about that. Val Kehoe is our other main team member. Val's joining us officially this year. She helped out on some projects last year. Val's got over 25 years of experience in the green industry, doing about everything you could imagine, including working with Conservation at Home and the U of I Extension as the Master Naturalist Coordinator for Cook County. And Val is a really active and enthusiastic community volunteer and educator. She does a lot of work with people schools and churches and community groups, planting gardens and planting trees, and just an all around great person. And we couldn't be happier to have Val involved. So I just want to talk a little bit at the beginning about a plant-based approach to gardening, where we really try to understand plants and how they live and what they want to do in the landscape as opposed to what we want them to do, and to work with them to have healthy lives.
Now, you saying they have a mind of their own?
They have knowledge of their own. I don't know that they have a brain, but they definitely, there's a lot of research being done about plants and their ability to feel and communicate, even though they don't have like that central neural center of a brain. Yeah, so before we even start talking about any garden practices, design practices, I think we should really consider how we relate to plants and on what terms we relate to them at. Are we really trying to understand the plants that we're putting in our garden and understanding how they live and how they've evolved to live in healthy social communities? That'd be the next slide. Yeah. So if there's one thing that you get from this presentation, this is it, and it's up front. Plants are social beings that have evolved to live in healthy communities. Plants want to be together. They want to be together with plants that are similar to themselves, with other plants that share cultural habits and traits, and they don't want to be alone. They don't want to be on little islands separated by 3 feet of mulch or 3 feet of anything. If you think of anywhere in nature other than extreme conditions, like deserts, alpine, cliffs, sand dunes, right, where there's extreme climate conditions or environmental conditions, plants are always together. They're always next to each other. They're always touching. Right. So I think a lot of what I've experienced is that people want to engage with plants from a human perspective and try to think about plants in terms of what people understand. And that we say that there are some good plants and bad plants. And in my mind, there's no such thing. Buckthorn, for example, that's a problematic plant. It does a lot of harm in our area and in our environments and ecosystems, but buckthorn isn't bad. Buckthorn's just a plant. Buckthorn doesn't have any moral center. I think that's just a kind of a construct that people have developed when they're trying to relate to plants or understand them, and instead of understanding who the plants are themselves. And if you understand who the plants are and what they want to be, then you can understand how to work with them and put them in the right position. Right. So, like I said, plants are just themselves. Plants are who they are. They've evolved for thousands of years. They have all of this knowledge stored about who they are and who they want to be. And they just need us to understand that and learn about them.
You're making me want to go out and talk to my plants, Chris.
You should.
And find out how they're feeling today.
Uh-huh. Right. So plants don't have an agenda. They don't have an ego or ulterior motives, and they never lie. Right? Plants are just who they are, and they do what they're genetically made up to do. Plants are never going to try to trick you into putting them in the wrong place. They're not going to, they're not going to try to, go and say, "Oh, I'm a plant that's evolved for thousands of years to live in the sun, and why don't you try putting me in the shade and see what happens?" Right? People are going to do that. The plants aren't going to do that. Yeah. So they're always going to tell you the truth. So if plants are struggling or not doing well in the garden, it's because of something that we've done and our misunderstanding of how to care for them. And it's not the plant's not doing it to you. And it's not that the plant doesn't like you. It doesn't really think about you.
No, you don't know. No.
Well, I don't know. Right. So the plants that we use in the landscape exist in the context of their ability to tolerate different environmental stresses while maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So I think we have a lot of tendency, and I even do this myself, to like look at a plant that's, performing well in the garden and say, oh boy, that plant looks really happy. Look at that happy plant. Well, we don't know if it's happy. I have like a lance leaf coreopsis next to a sidewalk in Schaumburg. It's blooming, it's healthy foliage, looks great. Is it happy? Well, I don't know. It evolved to live in a sand prairie. How do I know if that plant's happy there or not? It's just able to tolerate the environmental stress that we've put it in, and it's living healthy. That's all it is. It's not happy or sad or good or bad. It's just performing well. Right? And humans are the ones that make informed or ignorant decisions about placing plants in the landscape. So this is going back to that idea about buckthorn, right? Buckthorns didn't like get together and like form a cabal and say, oh, let's get on a boat and go over to North America and take over, right? Calorie pear didn't do that. And bindweed didn't do that. People did that. People, not knowing what they were doing, brought these plants over here and they got loose and into the environment and created a lot of problems. But it's not the plant's fault, it's people's fault. It's what we've chosen to do and our actions. And we need to make better decisions about how we place plants in the landscape and what we do with them. And that includes our native plants. So we need to understand the cultural needs of all these plants that we're putting into our gardens and how they behave and how they've evolved to behave and what they want to do. And we need to place them in healthy social communities with one another. So if we think about plants on their own terms and how they live in nature, we kind of come to this understanding of how the plants want to live, how we're using them, and how are we going to garden with them. So our practice is based on gardening that's informed by ecological industries. So it's more of like an ecological horticulture practice. Okay. All right. Yeah. So this is kind of like a explanation of that. So if you have garden and landscape industries on the right and the conservation and restoration disciplines on the left, right? We're kind of where that dotted line is in the middle, that purple line. There's kind of like this overlap in this Venn diagram. We're still gardening. We're still, our goals in my firm's practice are aesthetic, right? It's controlled, right? If you see at the bottom, there's this spectrum of wild to formal. We're left of center, but we're still gardening. We're not in the restoration trade or discipline, right? Our goals are very different, but they're informed by one another. So I need to make it kind of clear to people that when you're gardening with native plants in your home landscape, you aren't creating a prairie restoration, right? You aren't creating a woodland restoration. You're creating a garden, or at least I'm creating a garden that's informed by all of that. So on the left, right, you see this difference between conservation and restoration, and then on the right, a garden and landscape. So on the left, that's the prairie restoration at College of DuPage. On the right is a client's garden in Englewood. So that's inspired by this, the feeling, right, and the look and the aesthetic of the natural prairie. So the conservation side of things, it's very scientific, it's specific, it's objective, right? When they're doing restoration, they have very specific plants that they want to use. They have formulations of the seed mix for the quantities that they want, and it's very objective. It's not like they're going to say, oh, this prairie needs a big drift of 500 royal catch flies, right? That's not something that they're going to do in a restoration. What we do is inspired by that work, but it's an aesthetic and interpretation basically of that that's very personal, right? So I said, oh, okay, this is the client. They wanted to have, this is like a double lot. Uh, Half of one side of the double lot had this mural. Sorry, I'm pointing at my screen.
Mhm.
Half of that lot had this beautiful mural that they had installed. So we wanted the garden to reflect the mural. That's very interpretive. That's very personal, right? That's not scientific and objective. I'm trying to build something that's inspired by nature, but that's also very personal and means something to the client and that they can connect to it. So we're using similar plants, similar palette, but oh, totally aesthetic is context. Sorry. Next. Right. So I want to talk a little bit about our philosophy and how we design. This is a garden in the background in New Lenox um, that we'll be talking about a little bit more. This is just us installing all the plants. You can see Val back there between the P and the H, putting,
Mhm.
putting in some plugs. Go to the next slide. So our goal is to reference nature, right? And kind of like have that same emotional connection that you might have going to a natural area, going to a savanna, going to a prairie, going to a forest preserve, right? But bringing that into the home landscape and making it legible and having some design integrity. We want others, not just our clients, to be able to appreciate what we're doing and what our clients are trying to do. We want their neighbors to understand it and to be accepting of it and to want that and not to think that it's weedy or messy, right? So we're trying to create something that attracts people, not just insects, right? Because we need to attract people to this movement so that it can catch on more.
I love it, Chris.
Right? So our first step, so this kind of supposes that we've already done initial meetings with the client. We've kind of talked to them about what their goals are. We've done a site analysis. We're ready to go. So we find a reference point in nature that makes, that kind of fits the environmental conditions of the client site. This is the Middle Fork a savanna up in Deerfield. A lot of the gardens that we do are kind of savanna inspired gardens because in suburban and urban areas, there's a lot of mature tree cover, but then there's also a lot of open areas that get full sun right next to them, or kind of like some zones that get shade because of the houses, but the rest of the property is in full sun, things like that. So the savanna is a reference point that I use very frequently, as opposed to like a full sun open prairie or woodland. Woodland garden is also our other big one because we have a lot of shade situations, particularly in the city with all of the mature trees on the boulevard. Right, so then after we've kind of got this natural reference point, we want to figure out a way to define the place of the landscape that we're installing. Going back to this garden, right? We wanted to define this place not only inside the garden, right, with the mural in the background as a reference point that we were trying to reflect with the color palette of the planting, but we also wanted to make sure that the landscape fits in the bigger landscape of this property, right? So you can't really see it here, but you can see in the background there's a bunch of mature trees. The back half of this double lot is very wooded. There's trees on the boulevard, right? So we wanted to make sure that when we place the garden, in the person's property, that it's framed and it makes sense in the context of the larger landscape. And we'll see that a little bit more with another example later on in the slide deck. And we think about layers. I know you've probably seen this. I know you saw it last week. There's no better representation of this concept than this image from Thomas Rainier and Claudia West. So I decided not to try to reinvent the wheel. So I'm just going to use it again. But we think about layers in the landscape that are in nature. We have our ground layer, the perennial layer with forbs and taller grasses, bunch grasses, and then we have our structural layer with trees and shrubs, and then kind of, your larger perennials that are like the exclamation point. Excuse me. So we think about layers this way, right? But we also think about layers when we design in terms of depth, right? When you're looking into the landscape, not just these layers, up and down. We think about the landscape in and out. So we're not just thinking about that one aspect. And then we research plant communities. So something I use a lot is Flora of the Chicago region, Jerry Wilhelm's book, and Laura Raricha. If you're not familiar with this book, it's awesome. You can look up any plant that's, documented in the Chicagoland area, which includes, all the counties, even out into Indiana, and I think up into Wisconsin. And it'll tell you all the plants in different ecosystems that plant that you're researching is associated with. So my approach is typically I've got my standard plants that I use a lot that I'm really familiar with, but I always want to try things that are new or get new ideas or new inspiration. So I'll take plants that I'm very familiar with, research them, and find other plants that I'm familiar with and that I know, but that I might not have thought of in the context of what I'm doing, and introduce those into the plant palette, or get ideas of other things that I know will work. Like if I know this prairie dropseed and Echinacea pallida, right? They'll work really well together. But then I might be looking at Echinacea pallida, and there's another plant that goes well with Echinacea pallida that I wasn't aware of, but I know that plant goes well with another plant that I'm aware of. Then I can kind of make these connections about plants that, even though they aren't found in nature together, they'll work together because they have similar cultural needs. And then we develop our palette, right? And that palette becomes a novel plant community, right? A new plant community that's unique to the garden that we're doing. You're not going to go out and find all these plants together in nature or in Jerry's book, but we know based on our research and what we know about the plants that they'll perform well, and they have similar cultural needs, and that they'll work well together in the garden. And this is kind of like, this is all screenshots of if I was doing a proposal for a client, this would be like a representative palette that we'd put together of the plants that we might be using for that garden. This was for a garden in Skokie. You'll see later on in the presentation.
Chris, can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Because I know I'll forget later.
Yeah.
Since you talked about it. If people in the audience that are watching this are planning their own gardens and picking out plants and so on, is there a book or a resource that you would recommend to them that will help them with knowing some plants that work well together?
Yeah, well, the flora, that's probably
so that has that. So that.
Oh yeah, that's yeah. So if you go in there, right? So say you could look up lead plant, right? It'll tell you all the plants that are known to live with lead plant in the Chicago region. And a lot of them are going to be plants that we don't know because they're native plants that aren't in the landscaping trade or retail trade.
Mhm,
because they have very strict cultural needs where they can't live outside of where they're found.
mhm.
But you'll find a lot of plants that you do know. You know, yeah,
Perfect. Thank you.
I would get it. It's on my shelf up there, but it's big. It's a massive book, but it's awesome.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And does that book cover different regions, or you said it goes to like Indiana,
Yeah,
Wisconsin?
so it's broken up by like regions. You can look at it a bunch of different ways. Regions, like the type the type of habitat, like savanna, prairie, wet prairie, dry prairie. You know, you can go through all kinds of different ways to approach it.
But if it, like when you read the Bonap map, so many of these plants are native to a huge amount of the country. So
Yeah.
if those plants are native to, let's say, some of the same plants are native in Kentucky.
Hmm.
So the companion plants, the good companion plants would be the same as long as they're all native to that area, correct?
Well, if they were found in Kentucky, I mean, this book is specific to the Chicago region,
Right, but if they
and
were,
it's not necessarily specific to native plants.
okay,
It's plants
in general.
that are in general that are found in the like
So
wild, basically.
they could be naturalized plants as well.
Right, and they identify those, right?
Okay,
Like, yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Sounds like a great resource.
yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. That's Jerry's like the OG of conservation. So yeah, yeah. So then we start to design. So this is that garden in New Lenox. When we originally were going to work on this property, the garden was going to be, you can see on the top right, there's a tree just above the driveway. The client had a pollinator garden there that was, you know, kind of like a typical, maybe collector kind of garden that she wasn't like super happy with. It was kind of out of control, and she wanted to find somebody to come and give it a facelift. And originally, we were just gonna extend the garden over to the driveway and then to the sidewalk on the south end of the house, leading up to the house from the driveway. Uh, but they had these two oak trees at the front of the property that you see there in the drawing that they were really special to them. This client is very involved in conservation and environmentalism, and they have these oak trees they planted, and they have pictures of their son every year as he was growing up with the oak trees as the oak trees grew. You know, and it was very special. So when I was thinking about this project, I kind of pitched this idea to them of, well, why don't we take these oak trees, pull them into the design, extend the garden all the way out to them, and then really lean into that and lean into this oak savanna type of concept. And then it kind of, not only did it provide all these great ecological services, like, you know, getting the soft landings underneath the oak trees because these were just surrounded by turf, right? But it also gave the client that personal connection to the garden, right? So those oak trees that were special to them, where they have all the pictures with their son, those are now part of the garden. Yeah, and about this garden, what's cool is that this is a large property. It's about 2 acres. So just adjacent on both sides of the property, where the garden is, there are big stands of mature maples and evergreens, pines going back to the back half of the property. So it really kind of solidifies that idea of the savanna, right? Because you have viewing it looking into the garden, you have the two oaks kind of out by themselves, like in the sun, framed by what looks like woods behind them. And then we put a choke cherry uh, back here to kind of frame the back half of the garden, and then just dotted some other shrubs in to kind of lean into that savanna type of feel. Yeah. Right. So we work a lot with a mix of styles in a single garden. So this garden has blocks, drifts, and matrix plantings with some scatter plants. So everything that you see here that's kind of like a color, right, is a block of maybe a single species or two species mixed. And then there's like waves of pink. Those are all cone flowers that kind of stretch across both sides of the planting. So those are your drifts. And then there's drifts of little blue stem that's like kind of the aqua blue color that are going across both sides of the planting. And then in our matrix, the matrix sections are two different species of Sporobolus, Sporobolus heterolepsis, our prairie drop seed, and then Aeroides, which is a Sporobolus that's really native more to the Western US, but it does really well in our climate. And it blooms in the spring as opposed to the late summer for our native, our local Sporobolus. So it's really cool. You get the mix of that kind of airy feel in the garden, and you can kind of stretch it from spring to fall. So inside those matrix plantings, there'll be scatter plants. That's like just like one or two, of a species together, maybe three in a group, like, rattlesnake master, prairie blazing star. Sorry, I'm like stumbling because I don't want to use the Latin names. Flowering spurge, things like that kind of like just dot in all of those matrix
Most of us struggle with the Latin names.
I know.
With the common name.
I'm being very conscientious to use the common names in this talk. So I'm kind of like, when I think I'm talking the plants, I kind of have to think, oh, yeah. And then when we're developing patterns and thinking about the plants, we're always considering the growth rate and habit of each plant that we're working with. So that's the growth rate and habit are really important to understanding how to put plants into the landscape. Growth rate is not just the growth rate for that plant during the season. It's how that plant grows from youth, right, in a plug or 2-inch pot to maturity in 4 years, right? So that you can understand how each plant is going to grow together and grow into each other. So you don't want to put, as an example, wild indigo takes maybe 4 years to reach maturity. You don't want to put that next to a bunch of Cytotes grama when they're all in 2-inch pots or plugs, because that Cytotes grama is going to explode in the first year. It's going to seed. It's a prolific seeder. It's going to seed all around. And that baptisia that you're trying to grow from a 2-inch pot that's going to get about this big the first year is going to get shaded out and overwhelmed. So what we do is, like, for plants that we know have a slower growth rate, we use gallons or quarts if we can't find them in gallons, just to give them kind of a head start and a level playing field with all the plants that we're going to put in as plugs. And we do primarily work with plugs in 2-inch pots. It's just more economical for the client, and it also gives you access to more plants, right? Because the growers only grow the really high volume sellers in gallons, and kind of more of the niche plants, are grown in 2-inch pots because they're more geared towards the restoration trade than the retail trade.
I definitely made that mistake last year
Yeah.
in one of my beds. I put a small baptisia with some Cytotes grama.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I don't live at that house anymore, so I don't know what's going to happen. But I was wondering, could you give us any other examples of plants that you would recommend to plant in the gallon size, like
Oh,
lead plant
lead
or
plant. Yeah, sure. Lead plant, baptisias, even like silphium. Oh my God, prairie dock takes a long time, like longer to reach maturity. Some of the Amsonias take a while. They might need a head start getting them in gallons. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask your opinion of this. One landscaper told us, I don't even remember who it was, but said if you have what they will do sometimes, if they have the opportunity to work on this with like over multiple seasons or
Hmm.
years with the client, they'll put in the slower growing 1 year and they'll wait to put the more robust growing in the following year to give those plants a head start. What do you feel about that?
Um,
If somebody's doing this by themselves in their home landscape.
I would actually go the route of using bigger sizes
Okay.
and getting them in it all at the same time, because then you're not dealing with like all the weed competition that might come in while you're waiting. We do things like that and recommend things like that, and I'll talk about this later when we talk about some of the plants more. But like with heavy cedars,
Mhm.
right? If people really want goldenrods and asters in their gardens, which we all do, and we're not going to be taking care of it, right? And we're kind of like just getting it in for them and then giving them a plan for moving into the future. We might advise them to hold off on putting in those heavy cedars for like 3 or 4 years so that the other plants have a chance to knit together and kind of claim their turf, and
Mhm.
then introduce those heavy cedars later so that they won't, run
Gotcha.
over everybody. Yeah. But I don't know about that idea. I guess it would depend too on like the size maybe of the gardens. I mean, if it was like maybe a small bed, maybe you could do that, right? But like on a planting this size, I wouldn't want to do this. This is pretty big. This
Mhm.
is a few thousand square feet. So that might be, kind of
Mhm.
difficult. I think it's easier if you can get the plants in the different sizes to go that route.
Thank you.
Or, just be mindful of it. Just you can do it. Um, you could put them in all as plugs, but just be mindful that that this plant's going to take longer, and make sure to give it the space that it needs so that it doesn't get shaded out by its neighbors, and
Mhm.
make sure you keep the weed pressure down around it,
Mhm.
and just keep an eye on it. And then like maybe deadhead those neighbors in the fall
Mhm.
so that they don't have a chance to throw seeds around and crowd it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are different strategies. I kind of have to think about it and then think about how the plants grow and what they're going to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, legibility is really important to what we do. We want to make sure that people that are walking by, not only our clients, I think I mentioned this earlier, that they can understand what's going on, right? So we do that with repetition, in the patterns themselves. Like some of those blocks will be groups of plants, maybe 2 or 3 species that are in patterns, right? And those patterns repeat. And then we repeat the blocks that have those patterns in them across the planting, or we repeat the groups of plants. And then we use these bands, right? Of like in this planting, there's the bands of schizocarium, little blue stem, and the bands of echinacea that stretch. And they're actually, you can't see it. And I lost the file, and when I did this design, it's actually got a sine wave. Uh, there's sine waves that stretch across the planting that those bands of echinacea and little blue stem are on, because that's just kind of like even Nigel Dunnett, designer from the UK, had talked about this in one of his books about kind of using this idea of natural patterns that the human brain can kind of like recognize and latch onto subconsciously when doing these natural gardens to help with legibility, right? So we're we're kind of have that subliminal sine wave going, so somebody can kind of see that and subconsciously know, oh, okay, that's cool. There's order there, and we're stretching it. We're stretching everything across the design with repetition to make it legible. So when I do designs, we typically work with 60 to 40 ratio of grasses and perennials. I like 60% grasses and 40% perennials when I can. On larger gardens, smaller gardens, we might flip that to be 40% grass and 60% perennial. Or if the client, really doesn't want to lean in so hard on the grasses and they want more flowers, we adjust. Um, we use about 70% straight species natives. We do use selections of some of the taller native bunch grasses just because they stand upright in the garden. They don't flop. Some of the grasses, like big blue stem, switchgrass, even little blue stem, when they're in garden soil and garden conditions, they can lodge or flip over during the season. And for my goals that are aesthetic, I need those plants to be upright and to stay upright because they're kind of the grout that holds the garden together and provide cohesion and consistency throughout the planting. So if they're flopping and falling over, I'm not going to get that result. So I need them to be up and ready to go. Uh, we plant densely. We plant about on 12-inch centers. So that's the center of one crown to the center of the other. So, about a plant per square foot. More or less, we adjust that for some plants that need a little bit more space. And every design, I kind of try to include like 20% of it that's something new to me, so that I can learn. I always want to be learning about new plants and understanding, new plants. So I found that 20% is kind of a good amount of newness to experiment with in a garden because I can hide it. And if it doesn't work, we can fix it right away. And there's only one way to learn about plants and to learn about how they want to live and what they want to do. And that's to plant them and get them in the ground and grow them and learn from them. And you can't do that just by reading in a book. So we got to get the new plants in the ground. And we don't worry about perfection. We don't worry about being perfectionists about, oh, do we have enough natives? Is this not native enough? And all that stuff. We're just trying to get more natives into the landscape and not worry about, being purists about it. We want people to have fun. Some of our clients come to us and they want all native straight species, and we can do that. Some have ornamental plants that they like they have a sentimental attachment to, so we can work with that and bring those plants into their gardens as well. And I think that people should keep that in mind at their homes. Don't beat yourself up about, we all love native plants and we're here to talk about native plants, but don't feel bad if you like, Shasta daisies. Just it's fine. It's okay.
But if you have burning bush or buckthorn, rip it out.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If you have well-behaved, good neighbor type of plants. Yeah. Yeah.
And they may even be beneficial now that I think of it, because if there's certain species that everybody is really familiar with seeing, like everybody's so familiar from years of using azaleas or, like you said, Shasta daisies, and so maybe like putting some of those in the garden actually gives people the feeling of recognition.
It does.
Yeah.
Right. Because they can say, oh, okay, there's these things that I'm not familiar with. with
But
things
they
that I'm
look kind of
familiar with.
nice with that.
Right,
So
they look good together, and those things that I'm not familiar with are presented in a way that they're legible and it's intentional and it's not a big wow type of thing that we get sometimes.
that said it all.
Well, okay, so now we're going to talk about kind of our approach to how we garden through the seasons. And again, this is all very plant-based, right? We're following the lead of the plants and we're following how they would behave in nature, and we're trying to encourage those behaviors and not impose our will on the plants. So spring, it's here. We're going to be starting our cutbacks next week and the week after. So this is a sedge garden. It's got Pacra aurea, ragwort, Monarda bradburyana, eastern bee balm, and Carex rosea. So we put in the sedges first to get them established. I know this was just supposed to be a placeholder picture, but I'm going to talk about what's going on. Sorry, I can't help myself. So, so this is we put the sedges in first to let them get established and to mark their ground. Pacra aurea is a great shade ground cover, shade to part sun. It likes moist conditions, but I'm using it here to kind of see what would happen, to be honest with you, in a very dry shade condition, and it's thriving and doing really well.
Can I just
But it,
tell you, I have that along my driveway,
yeah,
right along the driveway. I
uh-huh,
love it. And it
yeah,
doesn't skip a beat there, and it's as
yeah,
dry as anything there.
yeah. It's a very tough plant. It's very adaptable, but it is very aggressive, right? So it will overrun its neighbors. But so what we did here is we put the sedges in first and gave them a year head start, kind of like what you're talking about. But this was to give them a head start to get established before introducing this aggressive ground cover. So as you can see, you've got some of the runners going right up to the crowns of the sedges, but they're not getting through there. They're bouncing off of them and going around. And that Monarda bradburyana, this is also typically more of a sun plant. This is in dry shade. It's doing really well here. I just wanted to see how it would do. And it's duking it out as well with the Pacra and doing great. So when I talk about these seasonal slides, we're going to talk about what we're doing in the garden for each season, and then talk about plants that we like for the season and that perform well and that do well for us, and then kind of like how we can leverage those plants and utilize them because they have great seasonal interest, or in some cases that they have great seasonal interest through all the seasons. So in early spring, right about now, we're going to be getting out and doing our cutbacks. We're going to be assessing the gardens, right, to see how everything did over the winter, what might need to be fixed, what might need to be added, if we need to divide things, if we need to take things out. And we're going to start doing weeding. We want to start getting ahead of all of those kind of early germinating winter kind of cold season agricultural weeds. And then later in the spring, we'll start doing like divisions and more editing, like introducing new plants, etc. And we're always weeding. So we weed the first 2 years of a garden, particularly if we're using plugs, every 2 weeks throughout the season. We'll be weeding mature gardens every 2 weeks, April, May, and into mid-June. And then by mid-June, mature gardens, the plants will be kind of knitted together and we can just kind of do it once a month. We check in to see if anybody snuck in there that needs to be dealt with. Okay, so this is from Heather Holmes. This is how we follow this for doing our cutbacks in the spring. We leave We leave stems up and we do them, at variable heights, like just like she's suggesting, 8 to 24 inches. The bunch grasses will cut back really hard to the ground almost. We do a hard cut back of the grasses. Everything is chop and drop. We try to not haul off material, right? We just going to do a chop and drop and use that plant material as mulch, going year from year. Bigger gardens will go through with like a string trimmer or something like that. Or I have a tool, it's power scythe. It's like a big hedge clipper that's on like a weed whacker shaft. And we'll go through and just cut everything back 24 inches and then go through by hand and cut back everything else with just like hedge trimmers. Yeah. But we follow that. Yeah, so when we're doing our assessment and weeding, we kind of do it together. So these are my main tools that we use on the right. These are Dutch push-pull hose. The one on the far right is diamond hoe. These are great tools for weeding if you're not familiar with them. The handle on the one on the right is about 7 feet, so you can stand upright and weed like this while you're walking around, and while you're weeding in between, that's like an 8-inch blade. It fits right in between all the plant crowns. So while you're weeding, you can assess what's going on in the garden because you're working around each plant. You're kind of looking at it. Is it healthy? Has it got any, weeds like seeds or seeds from neighbors that have fallen into the crown that are going to, germinate in the crown and root in that need to be addressed? It's really great because you can be upright and have fun hoeing and weeding. You're not on your knees, digging every weed out by hand. These blades just glide right under the surface of the soil and just kind of sever the crowns of the weeds as you whack them back. So you can even use this like on dandelions. You just keep whacking them back every couple weeks and eventually they'll run out of steam. Some weeds you can't, you have to resort to other means. Bindweed, a lot of the rhizominous weeds, those won't work for, like creeping Charlie, bindweed, things like that. You need to do something else.
You said before that there's no bad plant. Does that mean creeping Charlie as well?
It's not bad. That's not creeping Charlie's fault that it's here, right? Creeping Charlie's just creeping Charlie.
And wherever creeping Charlie is from, it's probably a wonderful native ground cover there.
Right. And it's the same thing like even bindweed. Plants aren't moral, right? Like plants are plants. They're not bad or good, right? They're just what they are. Some people made an ignorant decision, right, to bring bindweed and creeping Charlie over here and not understand what could happen if it escaped into our natural areas or even into our home landscapes. And it's not the plant's fault. It's just a plant. So when we're assessing, right, we're looking at what worked, what didn't. And, and while we're weeding, in the early spring, we want to get after those cool season weeds right away when they germinate. Yeah. And then what's going on in the spring? This is early meadow rue. This is one of my favorite shade plants. It's got this beautiful little dangling flowers, and that foliage is so delicate and awesome looking. It looks great with sedges and ferns in a shade garden. And what's really cool about it is that foliage stays year round. It's not an ephemeral, it's an early blooming perennial. And then that foliage stays in the garden throughout the seasons and looks awesome. It's a great texture, right? So in the spring, we've got our ephemerals coming up. We've got our cool season grasses and sedges. Our trees and shrubs are going off. So that's something I think that people forget about a lot of times when they're thinking about habitat and gardening for pollinators. Is trees and shrubs are a great source for our pollinators in the spring, right? The majority of them are blooming, right? A lot of pollen and nectar opportunities. And then our early blooming perennials. Right, so we have our ephemerals. This could be its own presentation. A lot of these things can be their own presentation. So I'm only going to give like an example of a few things and kind of more conceptually how we're using them rather than a talk about ephemerals, right? So, there's some really common shade ephemerals over there on the right. There's a trillium, toothwort, bluebells, and there are sun ephemerals as well, right? So shooting stars are great because they can go from sun all the way to part shade. So they're great ephemeral for using as a transition if you have a sunny area and a shady area in your yard or in your garden, and you want to have some ephemerals that can kind of bridge that gap. Shooting star is a great one. Bluebells you can push into the sun as well. We have our wild hyacinth. That's great for full sun, but it likes a little bit more moist conditions. And then the pasque flower, if you have dry sun, you could give that a try. I have not personally gardened with pasque flower yet. I'm going to be trying it in a few gardens this year. So maybe I can report back to you on how it'll do. But I've been dying for more ephemerals to get into our full sun areas. And so I'm going to see how it works. And then we have, our early blooming perennials, late spring to early summer. These are great because their foliage remains, right? They're not the ephemerals, right? They bloom, they emerge, they bloom, they die back, and they're dormant for the summer, right? These other early blooming perennials will stay up in the garden with their foliage after they're done blooming, and they're great for kind of filling in those gaps, right? Particularly in a shade garden where you've got, your ephemerals are done. You don't want a big hole in the ground, right? Where the ephemerals are. So you have these guys next to them and the ephemerals coming up through them so that these guys, their foliage stays and fills in the gap and remains textural and very interesting. So at the top, there's marybells. Those are really cool. If you're not familiar with them, after they're done blooming, and if they've been, if they're going to produce seed, they kind of like start to point like straight up with their seed pod. Solomon's seal there in the middle. Those flowers, it's got that very cool arching branch stem with the really lush foliage. It's going to arch over the sedges and the ferns, and then those flowers, they'll turn into like the little dark blue, purpley looking seed pods. And then Jacob's ladder there at the bottom. That's one of our favorite shade plants because it's kind of like the early meadow rue where it's got that great foliage that stays up. It's semi-evergreen in some gardens. And then in sun, Monarda bradburyana, Bradbury's Monarda or Eastern bee balm. It's a beautiful plant, great foliage, blooms earlier than the other Monardas, like Monarda fitzulosa or Monarda didyma. It's more in like late spring to early summer. It's a little bit shorter. It's way more resistant to powdery mildew than those other species of Monarda. We're technically out of its native range. It's more native to Missouri and Arkansas and southern Illinois, but it's a great garden plant. It's amazing. There's a whole slide on it that we'll talk about because of how it goes, how beautiful it is through all the seasons. Amsonias, great if those are pretty popular garden plants. I think most people are familiar with them. They've been used in the landscape trade for a long time, but they have great foliage. There's a bunch of different varieties. They have these awesome star-shaped clusters of flowers that look like, like the little balls. And they have beautiful foliage in the fall. Gold, red, really great. And then prairie smoke down there at the bottom. So when we're kind of thinking about spring and what's going on in the garden and we're designing and putting plants together, we think about succession and the layers. We don't want to allow gaps, and we want to think about how these plants are going to look later in the year. So I think like I was saying before, if you have your spring bloomers, after they're done, we want to use plants that are going to look good throughout the year. Like I personally don't use the native wild geranium. Not because I don't like the plant. I like the plant, but after it blooms, the foliage browns out. It doesn't look great. Kind of leads to that thing where clients maybe, or even passersby might see that and be like, what's this dead plant? Right? Because it's not ephemeral. It's not going to die back. It's not going to go all the way dormant and disappear, but it's just not going to look great. I'd prefer to use plants that can fill that same bloom period that are going to look great later in the year, that are going to keep their foliage nice year round. That's just kind of one of my So here's Monarda bradburyana at the top. Like when it emerges in the spring, it's got that beautiful, awesome maroon, bronzy looking foliage that comes up. And then it blooms in mid-spring to late summer. And then in the bottom, you can see like even into frost, those seed heads just look amazing. They look really beautiful in the garden. When there's grasses behind them, they're great. And it's really cool to put them in the foreground of a garden because they're smaller. So then you have those little seed heads in front of your other plants as they're blooming. This is one of my favorite plants.
Does it attract pollinators
Oh yeah.
as much as fistulosa?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and then here's an example of a garden that we put in Skokie. This client's property around that maple tree and in the courtyard was all winter creeper and English ivy that we had to eradicate before installing the garden. If you can see around the ring of the tree where it's darker, that's actually how deep the winter creeper was. It was like walking through like a big mat. So we installed the ground, we got rid of the winter creeper, we installed the ground layer. You can see on the left, it's like plantain leaf sedge. There's a skullcap in little groups. These are smaller shade plants that we're putting in. And then in the right, there's a ground layer of sedges and perennials in groups. You can see Val's back there in the courtyard working. Zoe, who used to work with Kat. Kat and Zoe helped put this garden in with us. She's over there. So all these stakes that you see sticking out of the ground, those are where our ephemerals are going in. So we put the ground layer in, and then I went around and put the stakes in with all the different ephemerals we were going to put in later. And the team went, and this is what's great about working with people like Val and Kat and Zoe. They know what they're doing, and it's great to collaborate with them. And so I could just put a stake that said, okay, we're going to put Marybells here. And they would go in and put a group of Marybells in. But you can see we're putting them in between those sedges and in between those ground cover plants so that the ephemerals will come up and do their thing while the ground covers and the sedges are greening up. And then by the time the ephemerals die out, the ground covers and sedges will have taken over that space. So it's not like we're going to say, oh, we want bluebells in this garden. We're not going to put a group of bluebells, like 3 bluebells on 12-inch centers in a group with nothing else there, because in June, you just have a big hole in your garden. So we use these ephemerals to come up through other plants that we know are going to be good neighbors and allow them to come up and not overrun them and just give them their space to do their thing and then disappear. It's kind of like how, people garden with bulbs a
Mhm.
lot. Mhm. Yeah. And then don't be afraid to mix it up. So don't be afraid, like I was saying earlier, if you like some non-native plants, to include them in your garden. These are some botanical tulips, these little pink and yellow guys. I've been experimenting with botanical tulips in part shade sedge gardens, and they perform really well. They actually kind of perform like ephemerals because they emerge really early. I've already got them coming up in our garden here at home. I noticed when I was uh, walking out today to pick the kids up. So they'll come up early, same thing as like our ephemerals, uh, and then they'll bloom and then they'll kind of disappear. And this is year 3 for these guys. So they're coming back every year. They're doing well, and it's in dry shade. And here they're mixed with Carex albicans. We've got some hairy alum root. This is a variety, this dark foliage that Prairie Nursery sells that I can't find anywhere else. That's really beautiful. I love this one. I mean, there are some selections in the trade that are like cultivars or hybrids that have this color, but for the straight species, you can only get this from this variation that I know of from Prairie Nursery. It's really nice. Then we have Solomon seal back there, and then you have a Marybelle coming up. That's just a really nice little shade, like garden community. But I think these botanical tulips look really cool with them. I really like them a lot. They're very cute.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So summer. This is a garden in the city. This is new construction in really horrible soil. This is the second year for this garden. This one was planted with gallons instead of plugs because the client wanted more immediate, like bang for the buck, than waiting on the plugs.
So that's the second year. That's phenomenal.
Oh yeah, that's the second year, and that soil is so bad that when we drilled into it, we used drills with augers to plant our plants. This was it was like on an auto shop or like an auto yard that took up like this whole block, and they demolished it and built these row houses on it, but they didn't haul out, most of the debris. They just buried it and then put turf down on top of it. So when we were drilling, there were like huge chunks of concrete, and it actually broke the shaft on one of my drill bits. But so what we did, because this is the access to this property, you couldn't get like a truck back here to amend the soil, right? It was there's like a gangway that went between two of the row houses that you could barely get a wheelbarrow through, and there's no alley access. So we typically, when we plant, we would use about 2 inches of leaf mulch
Mhm.
and then plant directly into that. Here, we used about like 4 to 6 inches
Mhm.
and over drilled the holes so that they were big. So we basically just amended every hole like a foot deeper than where the plant was going, and probably like 8 inches around each plant. And then this year, when I came back, not this year, last year, when this picture was taken, uh, I was doing some weeding, and there was something that had declined that I was digging up and replacing, and the soil was just like black, full of like insects and worms. It was really amazing. After 1 year, horrible soil, horrible, that this is what we got. It's really cool. The plants are amazing. But you can see even in this smaller garden, we're using a lot of grasses, right? You can see there's the little blue stem and the sporophyllus, and then going back further, there's switchgrass and big blue stem. And you can kind of, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at the screen, but you can kind of see it going like in a wave through the planting. There's like 4 beds here. And I did it so that when you were looking at it, you didn't actually see that there are 4 beds. That was because they have a dog. They didn't want their lawn, but they have a dog and they wanted the dog to have space to run around. So we did these like little beds with little runways for the dog to go through.
That's what I
And
thought. So I
yeah,
was looking like in front of like, it looks like there's cone flowers there. There's like grass lawn
there's
paths.
yeah, there's lawn
Okay.
paths around the islands. Yeah, but I wanted the islands to connect visually so that when you're looking through the garden, right, your eye could like kind of follow those grasses through and the cone flowers and the liatris. Summer is actually kind of the least intense time of the year for me.
Mhm.
We don't do a lot of editing in the summer unless there's like a super emergency, like something's really declined or disease, like we've got like, Asters yellow or aster yellows like coming into the garden and we need to get plants out. We'd rather just kind of make notes in the summer of what needs to be done and what actions we need to take in the fall and do any of that editing later in the season when the temperatures are cooler. So really, it's like you can see the constants, all seasons, weeding and assessing. We're constantly assessing what's going on in the garden, looking at the plants. How are they doing? How are they behaving? What's working, what isn't, and making notes of what we need to do later. Okay, so summer is the time for perennials. We really rely a lot on our grasses and our sedges in the summer. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, our trees and shrubs, they're still going strong in the summer. Not flowering, but they're still looking good. Um, Sedges, people might say, well, hey, Chris, sedges are cool season. Why are you talking about them in summer? Because even though sedges are cool season plants that grow, right? Their growth periods are in the spring and the fall. We use sedges that don't brown out or decline in the summer and they stay green through the seasons. So even though they might be dormant and not as active in the summer or taking a break, they're still holding their place and looking good. And that's really important in shade gardens. We'll talk about that a little bit later, where there's not a lot of stuff blooming in the height of summer in the shade garden, that we want to rely and lean into textures, and the sedges provide that. So grasses and sedges are essential to our process. Like, they really are. I love grasses. I I love grasses probably more than perennials at this point. I just
Do
love
you,
grasses
and
and
what are
sedges.
some of the reasons why? Because a
Oh,
lot of people are always like, I want flowers, I want
yeah,
flowers.
that's the next slide.
Oh, okay. I'm ahead of you here.
You are. Why
There you
grasses and
go.
sedges? Grasses and sedges provide a lot of ecological benefits as well as aesthetic benefits. So we use the grasses and sedges a lot for weed suppression, and the most important role is to regulate soil temperature and moisture on the ecological side. So if you think of the earth, and this is something I learned from Jerry Wilhelm, this isn't my thing. If you think of the soil, right, and the earth like your skin, right, the roots of the grasses and the sedges are like the capillaries, right? So they're fibrous, they're going out all over the place, they're holding things together, they're allowing moisture and like water and oxygen to go between like in the soil. They're holding moisture, keeping erosion, keeping the soil in place. So they're serving that function. But then aesthetically, they provide cohesion and texture. So you can use grasses and sedges like the glue, right, for your garden, or the grout to kind of just keep everything together and to tie different patterns together, tie wilder elements of the garden together. So if you look at this example in this picture, this is upland white goldenrod. Great plant, but if you just saw this by itself, somebody walking by would probably think that's a weed,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is this guy doing? Why does he have this weed in the garden?
Mm-hmm.
But if you put it in the context of this purple lovegrass, it elevates that plant, in my opinion, right? It becomes something beautiful and romantic, right? There's an emotional element to it that without the grasses, you probably wouldn't get. And that's really what it is for me with the grasses. It's the seed heads blowing in the air, kind of creating that gauzy effect when you're look at that gives the perennials the backdrop and space to perform.
You
Yeah.
definitely see this from an artist's eye. When
Oh,
you
well,
talk, I'm thinking you need to write a novel where the
oh,
main characters are different plants.
yeah. Yeah. So this is that garden that we looked at before. And here I've just kind of like showing you where the different grasses are coming in and out. So I don't know, let's start over here on the left. So like I said, all of those kind of like bluish green bands, those are little blue stem. In this garden, we used a couple different varieties, I think three. I like to mix up some of the grasses sometimes. This one had little red fox, um, sandhill, and haha tonka. So those are the three varieties. So that's what I like to do. Like, so each one of these bands will have like kind of like a mix of the different little blue stems at different heights to kind of give it kind of like some different height elements in the garden. So it's not just like boom, 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 bunch of little blue stem in a row or in a group. It kind of has like a little up and down undulating, a little bit different texture to the foliage, different color from the different selections. Like I said, I use a lot of native selections for the taller warm season grass. The kind of light purple area, that's switchgrass, panicum, purple tears. It's really beautiful. It's like a not quite as tall switchgrass, maybe like 4 feet tall, but it's got these really beautiful purpley pink seed heads that look great. And when they hit the light, particularly at sunrise and sunset, like the golden hours. Again, the big blocks, we're using a lot of two different Spirabolus species. The little off pink sections are purple lovegrass or blue grama. Originally, I was just going to use all purple lovegrass in this garden, but then I discovered a selection of blue grama called honeycomb from Intrinsic Perennials in Hebron. It's really awesome. It's got these really great golden yellow seed heads that look like little eyelashes or mustaches that kind of float in the air. It's a really great plant. So we use that uh, either in combinations with the purple lovegrass and some scattered plants, or we're replacing them in some of the blocks. And then under the trees, right? So all the dark green, that's where the oak trees were in the front. And then we have some shrubs that we put in the middle of the planting. And then in the back, there's the chokecherry. And then towards the house, they had some hydrangea and some other shrubs going down away from the house that they wanted to keep. So we planted that section with pen sedge, kind of like for more like a dry shade area. And under the oaks, we used mead stiff sedge, Carex medii. This is a really beautiful sedge. It's shorter. It can take full sun though, and keeps its color all through the season. Some of the other full sun sedges, they flop really hard, like Carex brevior and Biconelli. They flop really hard in the summer and then regrow again in the fall. Medii, it's a little shorter, but it's got this cool, like grayish, bluish green foliage that keeps its color all season. It's really cool. So eventually, as these oaks get bigger, that'll have to be replaced because the medii will move towards the sun, so it'll move away from the oaks, and we'll have to put probably some Carex albicans under those oak trees. But for now, the mead stiff sedge is really working well. Yeah. But yeah, we just use, if you can see just for how much of this planting is grasses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And and then there's groups of big blue stem. Right. And then this is that garden. So there we have like in the front, there's the Sporobolus. In the back, to the left, behind the rattlesnake master, there's some big blue stem. And then over to the right, there's switchgrass, that purple tears. This was all planted. Everything in this picture was from plugs the first year.
And how many years ago?
This was this year. This was in July of last year. Isn't that crazy?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
Wow, I didn't know grasses grew that. I mean,
Yeah.
that fast.
So
That's
that's why. So imagine if I had put like little baby baptisia in the middle of all
Oh
that.
yeah.
There is baptisia in here, but it was in gallons and it's not in this section of the garden. This is a really big garden. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I love coneflowers. I lean into them really hard when I have the right sun conditions because you can really stretch the bloom succession of the echinaceas by mixing Pallida, Paradoxa, and Purpurea. So you can start to get that coneflower shape in the garden in June with Pallida, and then get it stretched all the way out almost to frost with Purpurea. So it's really great, and they look cool together. When the Pallida is done, and you have the seed heads still up with the Paradoxa around it, but fading, and then the Purpurea starting to go off in a group. It looks really great, and it's just kind of like extends that feeling all through the season. Quinine, and again, these are just a couple of examples of plants. I could talk for hours about lots of different plants, but these are just ones that I have a lot of success with that are very helpful throughout the summer, right? Like, so that I can really get a lot out of one plant throughout an entire season. Quinine is amazing. It's got that really rough, right? Almost like kind of like physical textural foliage, right? It makes like a really kind of like a statement presence, particularly with when you mix it with the grasses or perennials that have finer foliage, right? That kind of ruggedness really sticks out. It's got these amazing, super cool flowers that are very unique, and it has a really long bloom time. I've had quinine in some gardens go from mid to late June all the way to frost. So
Wow.
you can use that plant as an anchor, right? And this is a trick that I learned from Roy Diblick, I think, who learned it from Pete Oldoff. If you use quinine with the groups of the coneflowers, right? So you can have the quinine as an anchor, right, all season while the coneflowers are coming up around it to kind of like anchor it, and you can kind of get that emotional moment all season instead of maybe just for a couple weeks. And then the other plants, are going off around that. So that's a good way to stretch your season with one plant. In the summer, shade, it's really about texture. Lots of and foliage with the ferns and the ground covers and the sedges. That's Christmas fern up top. In the middle is Heuchera villosa, That's my favorite native heuchera. I like that a lot. It can go part sun, shade, really adaptable. A lot of the selections that you'll find in the nursery trade or like at retail centers, the coral bells, they're hybrids or variations that have been bred of Heuchera villosa for different traits. Um, it's just a really great plant. And then, like I said, the sedges, we really lean into sedges in the summer. That's Carex albicans. It's my favorite sedge. It just looks, it's so delicate and amazing. It's beautiful. Sorry, I really love the plants.
We can hear it in your voice.
They're my
We do
buddies.
too. We do too.
Right. And then, trees and shrubs. So this is a garden that we inherited. The client had someone else put in kind of like this woodland garden in their backyard. It was way overplanted. There were shrubs planted like 3 feet apart. It was just a big mess. His wife was not thrilled, right? Because it looked, she couldn't even tell what was going on. So we came in the first year, last year, and we thinned out a lot of the shrubs. We took about, I don't know, a third to half of them out. We pruned a lot of them back, kind of thinned out what was left. And then we limbed up all the trees to get more light and air to the ground layer. And then we planted this ground layer underneath. It's primarily sedges, ground covers like the heuchera, bishop's cap, foam flower, wild ginger, things like that. And then, there's ferns and some Solomon seal and Jacob's ladder. But while this ground layer is establishing, this still looks great to me in summer, right? Just because the trees and shrubs are all healthy and beautiful and doing well. And because we thinned it out and got some light, to the ground and into the planting, it's relaxing and legible. And we can just kind of let the trees and the shrub carry this for the season. And you could, you kind of lean into that more at your home garden, right? You don't have, like, if people are always worried about like, oh, I have all this shade and nothing grows there and I can't have any flowers. Well, don't worry about it. Think more about texture in your shade garden and let the trees, right, that are creating the shade or the shrubs that are creating the shade be the focal point and allow the underplanting just to be this more relaxing textural moment.
Now, what is that right in the center? Is that a sumac?
It is. So unfortunately, that sumac, as beautiful as it is going to have to go.
I was going to say, is this because I always think of like sumacs as kind of like maybe like a good hedge plant for
so this sumac is really beautiful and it's actually got a really cool structure that it kind of just grew into on its own, but it's just not in a good space. The client actually wanted us to take it out and I liked it so much I wanted to leave it for a year.
I was saying the reason why I asked is because it looks so beautiful there. I mean,
it does.
sumac just has such a beautiful, leaf and branch structure, but it will.
Yeah, so we're constantly taking
monitoring the situation.
Well, we're constantly taking out babies and runners, but the problem is that behind it there's a really beautiful spice bush that's right behind it. You can see sticking out, but then behind that there's 2 really beautiful hazelnuts, and the client would rather keep the spice bush and the hazelnuts than the sumac. And I agree, it's not in the right place. It was kind of, I think, a happy accident that we're going to take it out next year. Yeah. And Val's been through here this winter, and she's actually done a lot of pruning and a lot more limbing up of some of the trees and shrubs. So it'll be even more open next season.
That sumac, it just is a beautiful plant though. Where do you recommend those, like as a hedge?
Yeah.
In a large landscape?
Yeah. as a hedge in a large landscape. Or if you really want one, look at some of the selections that are available in nurseries. There's some sumac selections that aren't as aggressive and smaller.
Like a hybrid?
Yeah, well, I don't know, not even a hybrid, just like a selection of a native.
Okay.
I mean, a hybrid kind of implies that there's crossbreeding.
Mhm.
So, with another species. So there's selection. So a lot of, I don't know, we can talk about this a little bit because I think it's important. A lot of the selections that you see that are named of native plants are
Mhm.
literally selections of something that occurred in nature, right? So it's not like somebody's in a lab, manipulating DNA all the time. Sometimes there's just people are out, you know, either nurseries that are growing a lot of trees, right? Maybe they have an oak, seedling that is really cool and it did something different. So they select that and they try to propagate it and see if it comes back from seed, not necessarily through cloning, or tissue culture. So a lot of the selections in the trade are true to seed, so don't I don't get so hung up on that, right? I just
Okay.
really, I think that's, yeah, there's a reason, right, that a nursery selected that plant. As long as you're not messing with foliage, that might be have some implications for larval host
Mhm.
capabilities, or, a mutation of the flower that doesn't allow pollinators to access it. I
Mhm.
I don't get hung up on that. So if you're looking for a sumac, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are some in the trade where you can find a smaller sumac that's more suitable for like a residential landscape. But yeah, if you want the straight species, put it out somewhere where it can do its thing. Because these sumacs there were 20 of them on both sides of this client's house, planted about 3 feet from the foundation of the house. We had to take them all out because they were just so much. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, they're beautiful, but
They are a beautiful
and
plant.
this
Yeah.
this one, in the fall, in the winter, and in the early spring before it leaves out, the form of this tree, it almost looks like a Joshua tree.
Mhm.
And that's why I wanted to keep it, because it like looks so cool and it had this great shape, but it just is not in a good spot.
I know. Right now, it looks like such a focal point, but I
Yeah,
understand. I
yeah,
understand.
yeah, yeah. So here we are in fall. Fall is one of my favorite times in the garden. Everything's looking really beautiful with all the foliage changing colors. This is straight species, little blue stem. This is in a client site where the soil here is really bad. I mean, it's pretty degraded, not ideal conditions. So here we're not really worried about the little blue stem lodging, right? It's because it's going to be upright because it's not in like soil that's super rich.
Mhm.
I just think that color is really amazing. That red with the rattlesnake master behind it. It's really looks good. So fall. So fall, we're going to start doing divisions and editing of the things that we've noticed over the summer during our assessments that need to be done. So we'll kind of observe and take notes during the summer of what's going on in the garden and then take action on those things during the fall. We're still going to be weeding because there's always weeding. And then we will be doing some deadheading. We don't like to do a lot of it, but we do it when it's necessary. And here, this is Carex albicans in the fall with some honey locust leaves starting to fall into it. It looks really great. This is my favorite sedge.
What's the common name? Is that the
Uh,
County
white
style wood
tinged,
sedge?
white tinged sedge.
White tinge sedge.
Yeah,
Okay.
Carex albicans.
Okay.
Yeah, so asters and goldenrods. This is their time to shine in the fall, in sun and in shade. and they're essential, right? Food source for our pollinators in the fall, but they can be aggressive plants and they can be bullies. I love them. I love using them, but I use them with caution. And we'll talk about why. But then here, this is kind of just down in that other picture where we saw the that upland white goldenrod, aromatic aster with some black-eyed Susans behind it. You can see kind of the seed heads back there, those coneflowers and the sporobolus. It's looking really good.
There we go.
Yeah. So if we have a garden, like I said, that we're not going to take care of and be on top of, and we're just handing it off to the client, and they will advise them maybe to wait until year 3 or 4 before introducing asters and goldenrods, so that the other plants have time to establish, claim their ground, and the asters and goldenrods can't seed all over. And when we do that, we use species of goldenrods and aster that we find to be less aggressive. So, in sun, I like to use Odora, sweet or aromatic goldenrod. We're a little bit out of its native range. It's more southern, but it's shorter goldenrod for full sun, and it's not aggressive. Uh, doesn't spread around by rhizomes as aggressively as some of our other goldenrods. It's kind of a little bit easier to control for whatever reason. It seeds around, but not as much. In shade, I use blue stem goldenrod. This picture is blue stem goldenrod with bottle gentians coming up through it. And then we have, like, in the fall, right, we have the seed head that's of Echinacea tennesseensis, Tennessee coneflower. And there's a Monarda seed head in the background, right? So we're just leaving everything. We're not worrying about, unless it's an aggressive self-seeder, right? We're not worrying about seed heads or keeping the seed heads up because they look beautiful and they're going to give birds food later in the season, the fall through the winter. And they just look really, I don't know, I think that looks awesome. Sorry. I just really
No, it
love.
does. Can
Yeah.
I ask you, so with the goldenrod, I have blue stem and I've
Yeah.
never had a problem with that being
Yeah.
crazy.
Right.
And I also have showy goldenrod
Yeah.
that I haven't. Is that your experience too? Because that has never spread for me.
Yeah, that's not as bad as like
Okay.
some of the other goldenrod. Like stiff goldenrod is pretty bad.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Zigzag goldenrod in the shade, that's really popular, but that's a fairly aggressive plant. Um,
Mhm.
and like I said, they're fine to use if you stay on top of them. And we do use them. It's not like I'm saying no, don't use asters and goldenrods. We have to because they're great pollen sources, but we just have to have a strategy for them.
Well, as an organization, we kind of have a policy of just recommending to, smaller landscapes, yards,
Mhm.
showy goldenrod or blue stem goldenrod.
Yeah,
Are
those are
we
good.
leading them right? Is there any
Yeah,
other species that you think would be okay for smaller landscapes or stick with those?
yeah, those are good. And like I said, the one yeah, Aurora, sweet goldenrod, that's another good one. That's the one I like a lot, just because it's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit shorter than showy goldenrod.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, yeah. And then we do the same thing. So if we're taking care of the garden, we will deadhead the asters and the goldenrods and other prolific self-seeders like Joe Pye, ironweed, things like that. We will deadhead those for the first few years, just so they don't go crazy.
And in your opinion, what are some of the least aggressive asters?
So I use smooth blue aster and aromatic aster in
Mhm.
sun, and then I don't know. I think all the shade asters are pretty prolific self-seeders, to be honest with you. But
Okay.
like I said, you just kind of wait a couple years to introduce them so that your other plants have time to establish themselves. Or if you do use them, uh, they're not aggressive like rhizominously, so you don't have to worry about that with the asters as much. Well, I take that back. So big leaf aster, uh, that's an aggressive ground cover type of aster. It'll fill up a lot of space.
Mhm.
We do use that in larger woodland gardens where we do want it to fill up a lot of space because it's got beautiful foliage and then some nice flowers in the fall. Uh, but yeah, like if you're using like any of the wood asters, just deadhead them the first couple years to give your other plants a chance to get going. Yeah,
I like that.
yeah, yeah. And then there's a lot of I'm just picking four, and I'm using grasses generically as one of the four perennials that look really great in the fall, right? So I'm gonna go. So Amsonia. We can just go to the next slide. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So this is Lurie Garden. This is Amsonia Hubrechtii, I'm pretty sure is what they're using here. And this just looks amazing in the fall. I don't think you can find a better example of a fall Amsonia display anywhere than this. It's just that golden, coppery color. It's really amazing. I just love it. So you could just have, one or two of these in your home garden. They're fairly large plants, but you can kind of, if you want to use it in your home garden, use it as a specimen plant or an accent plant or even like as a quasi shrub, right? And then you get that beautiful fall color. It looks amazing. If you put that with like some aromatic aster next to it, it's just really great. Flowering spurge, it's our native Euphorbia collata. It's I don't know if you're familiar with this plant in the summer. There's still some actually blooming here back there. It's got these little white flowers with the green dots in the middle. It's like they call it like baby's breath type of thing. Very delicate and airy feel. But look at the foliage in the fall. It's just
Mhm.
oranges, yellows, and it looks like a tree. Right? It looks like what we think of, people drive out to the woods, and out to New England to see the fall colors. Well, you can just have this plant in your garden and see it right there. It's really, it's really amazing. But that's the thing. It's like you just, but all this concept of seasonal interest, in my opinion, is really just allowing the plants to be themselves, right, throughout the seasons and giving them the space and positioning them to be who they are and to share who they are with us. Right? We don't have to do anything other than take care of them and make sure they're in the right positions. And I'm not trying to diminish gardening skills or design skills, but it's really true. The plants, if we just follow the lead of the plants, we don't really
They'll
have
tell
to.
you, they'll tell
They
you when they're
they
happy.
will. They know better than us. They've been doing this for thousands of years. This is Bowman's root. This is a beautiful native woodland perennial, like edge of the woods, like woodland's edge. Um, in the summer, early spring, late spring, early summer, it's got beautiful, like rosy white, five petal flowers, very delicate with pink centers, kind of like dangle. Looks really great, with in a sedge garden or with some Discamptia, uh, tufted hairgrass, that does well in part shade. But in the fall, it just turns this beautiful color, this really rich, dark red, maroon, golden color. There's a close relative, Western Indian physic, that
Mhm.
looks almost identical, but it can take more sun. So you can use that in a sun garden. It does the same thing, has the same effect.
There's something very soothing about that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then our grasses, right? So it's the same picture that we looked at before with this beautiful red, of the little blue stem. All the grasses are going to look their best in the fall. The seed heads are still up. They're changing colors. And then fall cleanup. We do not do any fall cleanup. That is not part of our stewardship program. We do spring cutbacks and cleanup. We don't do anything in the fall other than, over the winter, some pruning of shrubs and trees, when it's appropriate. But we just leave everything up in the fall. So here's some bottle gentian starting to fade. And I think it looks really cool. It looks almost like translucent. The flowers are getting this interesting, especially in the light here, with some Cytotes grama that's going to seed. And then leaving the leaves. We're leave the leavers. We don't, we encourage everyone to put their leaves in the garden. This is, just some leaves from a garden with the Carex albicans, right? So we don't want to, we're not going to, rake out the leaves or vacuum them up. We'll actually blow leaves at our clients into the gardens from their lawns rather than have have them be taken off site. In the spring, if some of the leaves, like this is one of the, I forget what exact kind, but one of the European maples in a city parkway. And the leaves, they're kind of leathery and they don't disintegrate. In the fall, they don't decompose and they'll squash and mat and prevent the plants from coming up in the spring. So we'll kind of like fluff them up and move them around so that they don't inhibit the crown growth of the plants, but we'll try to leave them in place as much as possible. And then in fall, you also get these moments of frost. This is downy wood mint with one of the first frosts we had this year. I just think it looks really cool. It looks almost like you're looking at it through a magnifying glass or something, or in a laboratory. Yeah. And then, of course, all of our trees and shrubs look awesome in the fall. This is just, this is an Eastern Wahoo. This is one of my favorite shrubs. This is like our native burning bush. It's going to turn this beautiful red color. This is when it's just first starting to turn. And then these seed pods, when they open up and the seeds drop, they stay on and they almost look like little ornaments that stay on the tree all winter. I could do a whole we could do a whole talk on trees and shrubs in the fall. And I think everybody probably is very familiar with how trees and shrubs look in the fall. So I just use this one slide.
I would love to do that because when we get, towards fall, we really want to start doing more presentations about our amazing native trees. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking now with somebody from the Chicago Region Tree Initiative.
Oh,
Just
cool.
so much of our tree cover is disappearing, and it's like
Yeah.
and it's so important that we get our tree canopy filled in.
Yeah, particularly with some of the
Exactly.
stuff that's gone on right now. Yeah.
And some of these amazing native species that you don't that would be
Mhm.
perfect for residential areas, but you don't see.
Right. Yeah. And then winter. Winter in the garden.
It actually is beautiful, and
Yeah.
you can look out there and look at the beauty and know that
Yep.
you don't have to do any work.
You don't have to do anything. That's the thing. It's like, oh,
So you can really like lay
winter
on the couch
interest.
and look out the window and not
Right.
feel guilty because there's
Right.
something you should be doing that you're not.
Yeah. So there's not like, I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot to say about winter and winter interest because you just let the plants be themselves and stay in the garden and be beautiful all winter. And there's some plants that look better than others, and you can put some thought into it, but everything's going to look good in the winter, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah. And so what are we doing?
I
We're
mean,
just
think
kind
of
of
what does winter look like on lawn? All you
right.
see is the white
Nothing.
snow.
Yeah.
There's no structural interest at
Right.
all.
Yep. Yeah. So in the winter, we're just kind of reflecting on the season. We're planning on what we're going to do in the spring, researching. We might try to get out, if we can, to some of the gardens just to see how they look in the winter and just get a different perspective on them. Yeah. And then this is a wahoo, right? With those seed pods that had opened up and they're staying all winter and they just look really cool with the snow on them. And this is what I'm talking about, just leaving the plants alone and winter interest. So this was on the Metra. I was on my last day of work. Uh, I was thinking about this talk and I was looking out the window and I was like, wow, look at this grass. This looks amazing to me. I think this looks beautiful. I don't know what grass this is. It's probably some horribly invasive, gross grass, but 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 it looks awesome because it's just a plant, right? That's doing its thing all winter and having this really cool color and this texture for us to look at as we buzz by on the train. And I just think
I think you're
everything,
teaching us all a lesson in this, Chris, that there's so much beauty around us if
right?
we just take the time to look.
Take the time to look and take the time to let the plants show you. That's really what we're all about. Right. So, like I said, we just let the plants guide you and try to understand them. The most important thing about gardening with any plants, not just native plants, is to know how they grow and what their habit is. So the growth rate, how they grow through the season, but also from youth to maturity, and then their habit. Are they mounding? Are they upright? Are they vase shaped? Are they a clump? Are they rhizominous? Right. So you don't want to put two plants that are rhizominous right next to each other because then it's just going to look like a big tangled mess. You want to put clumping plants and then rhizominous plant with them so it can kind of bounce around off of the crowns of those clumping plants. So those are just things that you learn as you garden, that you just by observation and getting to know the plants. And don't worry about being perfect. A lot of plants aren't going to make it. You're going to make mistakes. Plants are going to die. It's okay. Everybody does it. I've killed lots of plants. Everybody's killed lots of plants. And don't worry about being perfect with what you do. With, is this native enough? Do I have enough natives? Is this, anything is better, right? More more natives is great, but if you have plants you like that are well behaved and not invasive, go for it. Have fun, right? don't
Mhm.
don't get hung up on some ideal that you saw on the internet. Sorry,
Mhm.
just have fun, and just more natives are good.
I love
Ornamental plants aren't bad, right? They're, you can have both, and both, anything is a step in the right direction.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it. Oh wow, that was long. Sorry, this is like 2 hours.
Well, it was 2 great hours.
Oh, okay.
You brought a lot to this. First of all, I love all the photos that you had of established plants and established landscapes. We're
Yeah.
always getting requests for that,
Mhm.
and so you have, some amazing pictures of your work. And I really think that you helped us all see this from more of an artistic eye, and also just the taking the time to actually see what's right in front of us that
Yeah.
we often just miss because our mind is a million miles away.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, it's what I do for a living, but it's not anybody can do it, right? You can learn the plants and understand them and know them and get them in your garden and happy communities living together.
Do we have any questions, Lexi?
We have one question.
Oh,
What would you recommend for a baby oak tree that was planted last fall? This attendee lives in Western New York and was thinking about Penstemon hirstus and Sweet Joe Pie weed as a combo.
is that as an underplanting
I believe is an underplanting. Yep.
for a baby oak? I would, um, we need, so it's going to be, that's actually going to be getting a lot of sun as a baby, right? So it's not going to be mature and there's not going to be any canopy or cover. Uh, I'd probably use like mead stiff sedge. You could even use like Sporobolus, prairie drop seed, right? Because that oak's going to take a while to mature. The penstemon hearse, that hairy beard tongue, that's a really good one because that can actually go from sun into shade. So you could use that. That would be a really good like ground layer to mix with some of the sedges or the
And the
grasses.
Sweet Joe Pie would just be too tall, right?
That's
Under a
too
tree.
tall. Yeah, yeah, that's way too tall, and it's going to have way too much sun. That that's that Joe Pie likes shade, right? It does well in like part shade to shade, like at the edge of the woods, right? You'll see it like right in front of the trees, and then kind of receding, maybe like 20 to 30 yards back into the woods as it gets like the dappled sun. That would be too much sun probably for that plant until that oak tree gets mature. And also it's going to seed around like crazy.
So we see on the screen how to reach you.
Yeah.
Both your were to email you
Mm-hmm.
at
Yep.
info@resilientdesignchicago.com and your website www.resilientdesignchicago.com.
Uh-huh.
You just remind everybody of the services that you
Yeah.
provide.
Yeah. So we do design work, we do installation, we do stewardship and consultations. And that QR code you can use if you want to go to our link tree, and it'll have all the contact information and information about upcoming events and things like that.
Can people hire you from other parts of the country
Sure.
to do a
Uh,
consultation?
I don't know about other parts of the country. I'm not comfortable, to be honest with you, doing any kind of consultation work without being on site.
Okay.
I mean, there are people that do that, that they travel to the site. Um, I I would do that, right? But I won't if travel was involved. But I'm not comfortable.
And what
Like
do you require, a 4 or 5-star hotel? That's
Hampton
a
Inn,
joke.
Hampton Inn. No, no. But I'm just saying, I don't feel comfortable doing consultation over
Without
Zoom
seeing.
without being there, because you really, like I said, a lot of what we do, we want to help the garden or landscape that we're creating have a sense of place, right? And have a connection to not just the garden we're installing, but what surrounds it, so that it makes sense, right? When in the context of the surrounding, properties or the
Mhm.
property as a whole, if it's a larger property, and you can't get that over Zoom, you have to be there. And I really like to have like a personal connection with my clients. So I like to interact with them in person and understand them and their goals, and
For sure.
try
And
to
so
try to have a personal connection, with people, because I think that gardens are very personal, right? So
your area, service area again is in the Chicago area and
yeah,
pretty much like Cook, DuPage, Will County.
yeah. Cook DuPage will, some of Lake, we'd go up there. even into Northwest Indiana. That's fine,
Okay.
but yeah, but I really want to, my goal is always to have a personal connection, like I said, a personal connection with who we're working with and understand them and their goals and to make the garden connect with them. And I just feel like you can only do that in person.
Well,
Yeah.
this was terrific.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Oh
Chris.
yeah, thank
And
you.
I would look forward to the opportunity to talk more about trees later in the year
Oh,
because
okay, sure.
we need our trees. And
You could
also
have,
if anybody,
you could have the Val do that.
pardon?
Val.
Yeah, she knows all of our
Yeah,
native trees like the back of
yeah.
her hand, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, and if anybody come on out to our plant sale on May 31st, if you live in the area
Yeah.
at Moraine Valley College, because Chris is going to be there
Yeah.
signing autographs. No.
No. No.
All right, thank you so much, Chris, and
Okay.
thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and we'll see you in our next presentation.
Thank you.